David, are you there?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
So you were just about to totally agree with my premise about Nancy Pelosi trying to basically block anything that might be structural in some way, like any artifice that's going to exist after the.
Yeah, but I know and look, I know what you mean, and I'm not disagreeing with that completely out of hand, but the point is that if you spend $3 trillion and it goes to lower class people, small businesses, and state and local governments, and then on to their employees, that is structural. That because in the absence of that, you're destroying that sector. You're destroying people's livelihoods. You're putting them in a hole they won't be able to come out of. So that is structural. The giving $1 trillion to state and local governments and preventing a depression is structural, because
right.
the depressions have long-term consequences. So I'm disagreeing to an extent. Obviously, there are just a jumble of contradictions in this thing, because there's no real thinking about what the goals are wishing to accomplish. It's just sticking a finger in a dike. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. And I don't want to let progressives off the hook.
I was just going to say,
they don't really have that coherent a theory either, and they certainly don't have any idea of how to deal with Nancy Pelosi. I mean, one of the most embarrassing comments I've ever seen from Representative Pramila Jayapal, who says that she is a no on this bill. Now, she has been fighting with Pelosi because she wanted her idea, which was direct payroll support for all workers, rather than trying to push everybody onto unemployment. That wasn't in the bill for a variety of reasons, some of which it was Pelosi just kind of being a tyrant. And so there was this question of, well, is the Progressive Caucus going to sink this bill? Jayapal, of course, is the co-chair. So she gave a quote to Politico where she says she's a no on the bill, but that's not an official position of the Progressive Caucus. Also, she's not whipping Dems against the bill. And then she told the reporter, "Can you please put that in your story?" It's the most embarrassing quote I've ever seen. Like, just not only a refusal to fight, but like foregrounding the refusal to fight. Like, please mention that I'm refusing to fight. It's you cannot just sort of out of hand condemn Pelosi without talking about the fact the rest of the caucus is incoherent as well.
And I will say that you also you had a piece, I don't know, maybe it was 2 or 3 days ago, that Jayapal was basically had her legs cut out from underneath her by all these outside progressive groups who.
That's correct.
I mean, I think the list was it Move On, WFP? Was it others that were basically?
I don't think it was Working Families. I think it was Indivisible and some unions. And I mean, but that's just a total lack of communication. Literally, those organizations were standing with Jayapal and saying the next bill has to have this, and this. And one of those things being the paycheck guarantee, payroll support. And they just jumped out and said, yeah, $3 trillion, yay, we support the HEROES Act. Not seeing this internal fight where Jayapal was trying to get more input on the bill. And it even extends to this. The Congressional Progressive Caucus Center, which is an outside group it's not directly affiliated with the Progressive Caucus, but it's tied to them in some way. They initially tweeted out support of the bill when their co-chair was vociferously against it. I mean, this is just a total disconnect on the progressive left, or among the professional left, I should say, in D.C. They have no power. They have no understanding. They have no idea of how to build a coalition. It's laughable.
I mean, this is it's stunning. Is this? I mean, is it just that we've always had this absence, or is it just like in this type of environment it becomes most obvious?
I mean, I think the latter. Crisis moments, particularly in the last decade or two, given the gridlock in Congress, crisis moments are when you govern, and they don't come along very often. And clearly, they have caught the Democratic policymaking apparatus, to the extent that it exists, completely flat-footed. And you look at the Republican side. The Republican side wanted one thing. They wanted a corporate bailout. They wanted corporations to be protected amid the pandemic. That's all they wanted. They didn't write a message bill with 30 things like, banning all abortions and guns on demand, or I don't know, whatever it would be. They just wanted the corporate bailout. And so McConnell on the CARES Act writes a bill with a big corporate bailout. And other things he trades away, but as long as he gets his corporate bailout, he's happy. So what happens on the other side? Pelosi writes a bill with 300 things in it, and there's no one thing that's an anchor that is the thing that Democrats want. And whether that's structural or not. I mean, corporate bailout isn't necessarily structural. It's a near-term response to the problem, but it will have long-lasting consequences,
right.
Because it's a disproportionate response at the top end of the corporate ladder, and it will create this increasing dominance of large corporations in American life. Pelosi just doesn't have that vision. I mean, this is absolutely the opposite of what Republicans do with governance in a crisis. And so it says to me, and because progressives don't have that vision either, it says to me that vision doesn't exist.
And it seems to me that, I mean, a big part of it is also just a function of the differences between the two parties in terms of how they're made up, and broadly speaking, with the left, right? I mean, because on the left there's like 40 different issues that are the most important issue. You want your leadership on some level to be able to sort of coalesce that and say this one or two things are really sort of like, this is how you sequence it, at least, or something to that effect. But there's none of that. There's none of that coming from Pelosi. I don't know. Is Chuck Schumer still working? Is he? Is Chuck Schumer still with us?
Chuck Schumer's in the minority, and obviously Pelosi's going to need to take the lead here because she controls the House of Congress. The thing that she likes about having 300 things in the bill is that there's always something for someone to latch onto. So, Progressive Caucus can say, oh, well, we got $100 or $1 trillion for state and local governments. That's good. And now we have to weigh that against the bad stuff, and on down the line. So they can sort of buy off various interest groups and people within the caucus by giving them the one good thing. This is how legislating has happened since Pelosi took back the chair. I mean, remember HR 1? Remember?
Yes. Well, I barely do. I will say, I barely do, because they buried it with their own attacks on Ilhan Omar at the time. But yes, I get the point taken.
Right. But what do? They pool together 30 different ideas around some sort of loosely organized principle, and they put this omnibus bill together. And then they throw it over to Mitch McConnell, and he says, I'm not doing anything with this. And then they're shocked that they don't get attention within the public over their great bill that has 30 things in it that you can't describe to anybody. So this is the same style of governing. We're going to do the HEROES Act, which is, the HEROES Act, come on. That's the whole name. I feel like the preamble should be, in these challenging times,
Right.
You know, like
The local
what does
ad.
that even mean?
Yes. Well, and I mean, that is what was so sort of mind numbing about this notion of like, you got to pass it today, because if it's a messaging bill, it seems to me the one thing you would want is people to talk about it, right? Like, to get the message out. They're going to pass it, and then it's going to be dead on arrival by Monday, and it's going to be gone. It's just like if she wants to be the ability for various different House members to be able to say, I voted for this provision or I voted for that provision, and that's it. There's no message being sent out here.
Exactly. The summary of this bill was 90 pages long. Not the legislation was 1,800 pages, but you couldn't even describe what the bill does in less than 90 pages. How is that going to be an effective political messaging tool? It just doesn't make any sense.